And you are live.
Hi. Hi, Corey.
Hi, Louise.
Hello, everyone. We're so happy that you're here tonight, joining us to celebrate my friend Corey Rosen's very first book, Your Story Well Told. Woo! And I would also like to thank the host of this party, Barbara's Bookstore. My name is Louise Lamson. This is my friend Corey Rosen, and I am a big independent bookstore fan. And I'd like to thank Barbara's and Laura, who helped us with this evening. And, one way we can support Barbara's, they've been around for almost 60 years, Corey, which is quite something, is to click this link. It says, get your copy, the copy of this amazing book. And you'll get 10% off with the code EVENT. This is an event. So please do. It's a great way to support Barbara's. And
it is a signed copy of the book too.
Oh, and it's a signed. I have a signed copy of a book. Look, my signed copy. So Corey, without further ado, let's talk about you. Who is Corey Rosen?
Who is Corey Rosen? Who is Louise Lamson?
Corey, you know what? You are a multi-talented human, and you are a regular host of the Moth Story Slam series in the Bay Area. You are, your stories have been featured in the Moth Story Hour and the Back Fence PDX main stage. You started your career writing for Jim Henson Productions. You've written for Comedy Central and Lucasfilm Animation, and you are a main stage company member at Bats Improv, where you improvise feature-length plays.
This is true.
Is that really true?
This is all true, yeah. So we'll take a suggestion and do a improvised long form. Yeah, like a 2-hour long form.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And that's my world, the world of plays and theater.
Totally
so
is,
I want to see you do that. So anyway, you also are a visual effects artist, and you've worked on such films as Iron Man, Ted, The Phantom Menace, Grindhouse. You live in San Francisco with your wife, Jenny, and your 2 beautiful children, Noli and Henry. And to reiterate, you are a first-time author who's written an amazing manual on how to tell a good story.
I love it.
So here, your book is about stories, right?
Yeah,
so I've got, if it's okay, I know I'll shut up in a second.
No, don't shut up. You're doing great. You're also a first-time author event co-host. Is this true? This is your also first time. So don't be afraid to give it up in the chat, everyone who is watching, for Louise and the amazing hosting that she is doing for the first time. Looking Glass Theater, director, performer, and multi-talented actors who I have been friends with for, we don't want to say how many years because it's been a number of years, from our days at Northwestern University together, including work on the Meow Show, an improv company, and beyond. And just so people know, like Louise and I actually reconnected through the theater. You were doing Metamorphosis on tour.
That is correct. Yes.
Which brought you to Berkeley, California. And I saw you at the Moth. That was where
So true. So people, you have to understand, Corey and I see each other at Northwestern, we become friends, and then, as it happens, we lose touch. 20 plus years pass. I find myself in Berkeley at Berkeley Repertory Theater, and we could cross the street to this amazing performance venue called Freight and Salvage and pop in and catch the end of a show, whatever was going on there. And that day, I saw on the marquee Moth Story Slam, and I'm like, that is fun. I love Moth. I'm going, and I go, and I walk in right before intermission, and there is this vibrant, charismatic, charming human on the stage hosting who looks oddly like Corey Rosen. And I'm not kidding, Corey. I spent all of intermission, was like, that's Corey. Oh my God, that's Corey. And then I enjoyed the rest of the show. And then I went to the stage and waited in line with your other super fans to say hello.
Yeah.
And I just want to tell you, life just works in funny ways. I got to meet your wife. I got to meet your children and see where you are in your amazing life in San Fran. But most importantly, I was reminded, and how could I ever forget what an amazing human you are. You are one of my favorites. And so I just am grateful to be here tonight with you doing this.
Same. Let's talk stories. I know that like we're having fun talking to each other, but there's probably people who want to hear us talk about something else. And I also want to encourage people that if you have questions at any time, there's an ask a question feature, so you can participate in this and ask questions about anything.
About anything, and we want to hear from you because it's about you.
Mm-hmm.
So Corey, this is your book, and let's talk about it. I'm just going to start real quick with another quote from one of your fans, and I think this is just a great way to talk about your book, to start talking about your book. It's everyone is a storyteller. It's how we communicate, make friends, and go through life, but few of us would dare to tell a story in public for fear that it has to be a good story. Corey's book demystifies everything. His book will help everyone have the confidence to share their story with the world. And the more we hear each other's stories, the better we'll understand each other. Get this book, give it to your kids and yourself. This is your friend, I think William Hall, who's the founder of Bats Improv. I've never met him, but I agree with everything he says. Yeah. And I really agree with that. The fact that stories are how we understand each other. And I think that's so important, especially right now. And my first question for you, because I want to hear, it's all about you and your awesome book, is why do you think it's important to share stories?
Well, we're always sharing stories. Like everywhere you go and everyone you talk to, it's like the currency of how most of us communicate in some form or other. How was your day, honey? Like, what did you do today? Like, we're always kind of asking or seeding each other to tell stories. And I think that it's the kind of thing that sort of, you think about, like, everybody in their own nature in some ways is telling stories all the time. There's times that we're more, directly, like, I'm going to tell you the story of the time that this thing happened, or we might find ourselves in situations where you have to tell a story. Maybe you're on a date or a job interview, or you're, coming out of this isolation that we've been in for however many months this has been, and we're connecting and reconnecting in ways that we need to. And I just really believe that the way that we do that anyway is through telling stories. And the fact of the matter is, and something that sort of I observe both from stages like the Moth story slams and stuff where people get up and tell stories, to just my regular interactions with people, is that storytelling seems to come really naturally to some people, and for other people it feels very forced, or it feels unnatural in a lot of ways, whether they're overtly telling a story, like, I have to tell you the story of this thing that happened, or they're just communicating something normal from their day. And some people frankly don't have a sort of a natural fluency with it. It's something that we can always get better at doing. Yes. And so the book, in a lot of ways, came out of that, connecting people with this idea that we have a lot of stories to tell, both stories for things that happened maybe recently in our lives, or things that happened a long time ago. And for a lot of people that are either creative or maybe at a place in their life where they want to share those stories with maybe their grandchildren or their community, they can often get sort of stymied or stuck of like, well, I don't have any good stories, or I don't know which story to tell. So part of the motivation and part of the inspiration for the book and what's in there is things like that, of like kind of, it's not a book about improvisation, but it's using some of the things that improvisers do to kind of unblock ourselves from ourselves, to unblock those ideas and to say, what are my stories, or what stories could I tell? And once I find those, how do I tell them better?
Totally.
Yeah.
No, it's so true. We all have that critic that rests on our shoulder that's like, don't say that, don't. So I guess just to expand upon that, as an improviser, how do I flick that critic off my shoulder?
Totally.
Please liberate me.
It happens all the time. It happens to all of us. It's that second guessing thing that we do. So it could happen right now. It could happen in a conversation where you're about to say something and then you're like, oh wait, is that the right thing to say? I should not say that. Or it could happen, it happens very often when people are coming up with ideas like, oh, what should I write about? I'm going to write something. And they start imagine the scenario, you're a writer and you've got the blank page on your screen and it's the blinking cursor and you're like, I got nothing. And then you start to write something and then 1 or 2 sentences in, you're like, nah, that's bad. And you start fixing it and deleting back and then you're writing something else. And there's constantly this sort of negotiation between, is it good? Do I like it? Is it worth reading? Is someone going to make fun of it? Whatever that is. And what it's fear. But think about what does an improviser have to do when they get on a stage is they take a suggestion and they just start to talk and make it up. And they are making it up live in front of other people or very often with a partner, like with somebody else. Mm-hmm. And you don't basically have time or have room to second guess your ideas because the train has left the station. And so you are already creating something. And so I liken the creative process and the storytelling and the writing process to that instinct, which is let's let the train out of the station. Let's see where it goes and learn to silence the critic on our shoulder from saying that's a dumb idea, that's a bad idea. And let's just discover what that idea is. Because once that idea has kind of manifested itself, gotten out and spoken, you probably will find something of value in that idea. There will be some idea, some morsel, some part of that you can build on and you can kind of follow that train. If we stop ourselves from having the ideas or if we step on the idea before we even let it come out, we're never going to get there. So absolutely. Yeah. So I'm a really big fan of just kind of like that, like just I have an idea and I basically force myself to write the bad version of that idea. Like
you call it the vomit draft, right?
I call it a vomit draft. Just get it out. I'm going to write a version. Like I have 15 minutes to write a version of a thing and I'm not going to critique it. I'm just going to write it down. And usually, not always, but usually it's like, that's kind of what I thought it was going to look like. Like maybe it's not perfect and I'll certainly have to go back and revise it, edit it, structure it, things like that. But there's so much time that I used to spend not writing where I would say, I'm not ready and I'm going to wait for it to form. Really, I was just stalling.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Because you want it to be perfect the first time out. And that's just an impossibility.
Yeah. Have you had that situation like where you're trying to write something?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, so what I wrestle with is like, because I'm not as much of a writer. Yeah. I'm more of a performer, but it's about how much preparation and so you feel like you can be on stage and feel confident, but then also sometimes it's like with the critic, it's like just be in the moment. Mm-hmm. Like, just look at the person on stage with you and like forget everything else and forget like what happened the moment before. Yeah. And there's something about the vomit draft where there's no time mm-hmm. to think about what you just wrote or where you're going. You're just in the moment. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I relate those two worlds.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I think when you're on like an actor's role on stage, when you are sitting there, whether you like have your script in your hand or you're just creating something with another actor, you're also feeding off of their energy and what they do. What they do affects and influences how what you're going to say next and what you're going to do next. It could be
absolutely, even if it happened a certain way the day before. It's like no, you have to be present. You talk about being present. Yeah. I mean, just that idea though of. I'm just curious for you because I just think about your journey with storytelling. Like when we were at Northwestern, I wasn't like, oh, Corey's going to write stories and he's going to be a storyteller and he's going to be a master storyteller and have so many words of wisdom by his book. Seriously, I have referred to this book so many times since I read it.
I love it.
Sincerely. But I'm curious, what got you to this first stage that you were on with the mic in front of you, ready or not ready? We have your book to help us get us there, but you did not. So will you talk about that process?
Sure. I mean, I think that there's a lot of avenues and sort of venues, places that people could tell stories, of course, from very intimate ones to bigger, larger stages. I am someone who does perform. I even in college and even before college and since college, like I could never get out of me the enjoyment and pleasure out of co-creating, which is why I sort of stayed with improv theater. I had kind of a double life when I moved to San Francisco because I was interested in technical, like movie production. I got hired by Lucasfilm, Industrial Light and Magic, to make like Star Wars movies and visual effects and that sort of side of it, which is a wonderful, beautiful thing. And I love doing it, but I also I liked the process of creating something live. Visual effects is a very like labor intensive process that takes hours and days and weeks to create a moment for a film. Whereas an improvised scene is just created in the moment, lives in the moment, shines, and then is gone.
It's ephemeral.
Yeah.
That's all I love theater.
Yeah, it is. It's like, it's theater. It's spontaneous theater. And so for me, I love doing the theater, but also I kind of wrestled with this idea because I have a working like 9-to-5 job. I didn't have the time in my day in my life to commit to a play. So, improv to me became a shorthand way of doing that, of staying involved, staying active, and being on stages. And that said, I should also put this out there, is I get nervous when I go on stage too. Whether it's a Moth stage, whether it's an improv stage, like a lot of people have a bit of stage fright. And for me, it's kind of, I sort of reframed it now. It's like, it's an energy. It's like a excitement that it feels like.
Nervousness.
Yeah.
You retitled it. Oh, I like that. Okay.
Kind of. I've experienced real anxiety. So I know when I'm having, like when it's anxiety versus it's like the butterflies or the nervousness, especially when you're going out on stage and you don't know what you're going to say. So what I try to bring to my work in storytelling, whether it's like being on a stage telling true stories or not, is a little essence of that, is that if it's a story that's something that really happened in my life, of allowing there to be some air in it. Like I know the story that I'm going to tell, but I also know that I'm not going to go in there with a fully prepared monologue in my mind that I'm going to recite word for word, because I've seen people do that. And I've heard people, even to me, tell me a story where they're telling me a true story, and yet it feels so false because it's so practiced and so precise in the way that they're telling it to me, that I'm like, are you talking to somebody else? Like, are you talking to me? And I feel like really the power of a good story is something that is truthful, that feels real, and it also feels present. It feels like you are here in the now.
And you're telling it for the first time. And
it kind of feels like you're telling it for the first time, where in some sense, you should be. Like every telling of a story in some way is going to depend on who's in front of you. And they are giving you real-time feedback, whether it's somebody on Zoom that is nodding their head, or it's an audience full of people that is checking their watch because, is this over almost? Like you're getting feedback from humans as you tell your stories, and you should be able to identify that and know, like, are they laughing where the funny part is? Or should I hurry up and get to the end of the story because I've been talking a long time?
What stage were you on for the first time when you told your story?
So the first storytelling thing I did was a Moth show in San Francisco. It was the first time that they had done the Moth Story Slam in San Francisco. I heard about it on the radio. They were like, we're bringing the Moth to San Francisco. And it was like the next night. I heard the show on a Sunday, and it was on a Monday night at a little dinky bar called the Rickshaw Stop. And I waited in line. I got a last minute, standing room only ticket. I cram into this place. I'm by myself, and less than 24 hours.
Did you tell anybody you were going to do it? Or
I did. I did.
Okay.
I told my brother. My brother is a great kind of confidant and assistant for me. Like we talk a lot about creative projects that we do. He's also a writer. He wrote a show I was listening to today called The Other Josh Cohen. That was an off-Broadway hit for a long time. I was listening to it today, and it's so full of just beautiful, delicious gems. But anyway, so the night before this show, I had to come up with a story. I only had basically a day, and the theme of the show was secrets. And so that's kind of the way that a lot of these kind of shows are, is that there's a prompt. And so your story has to have certain limitations. It could only be 5 minutes long. It had to be true. I couldn't read it. And it had to be about the theme, which was secrets. And I went through in my head, what are secrets that I have? And I wrote them down, and it was like, none of these were good stories. They were like confessions or weird brags. I don't know. There was like just weird things that I was like, none of these, I wouldn't want to get on stage and tell them. So then I kind of, in my head, I played this kind of game with myself where I thought beyond like my secrets. I was like, well, what is a secret that I know about someone else? Mm-hmm. Or what's a secret someone's told me? Or what's a secret that I broke? I started to kind of expand the horizon of like what this prompt could mean. So it wasn't just like, I have a secret and it's this.
It could be deodorant.
It could be a story about body odor.
Secret deodorant. Anyway,
about deodorant. It could be a secret about a secret hideout that you had. Like there's other definitions. And that was where I started to find inspiration. So I got inspired by a secret that I discovered about a relative of mine when he died, and I read his will. And so in less than a day, I kind of crafted the story, and I worked it out with my brother on the phone. We just talked it out. And so the first stage that I was on was the Moth Story Slam, and I got picked. It was a random hat draw. I told my story, and it went well because I won the show. Like there was a winner declared.
Wait,
and I
the first time you told the story, you won the whole shebang?
Yeah, I won that show. And it was better than winning that because also the producers, since it was the first time in San Francisco, the producers from New York were there, and they were like, hey, would you want to host the show? Because they were sort of setting up shop and they needed a host. So it was really truly a lucky opportunity for me.
So if you buy Corey's book, that will be you.
Yeah. Well, actually, the story that I told that night is in the book. It was about my cousin Norman. And I love that story still because it's a tribute to somebody that I love. People are going to
be like, tell the story. Yeah. I don't want to. What do you think? Do you want to tell, or should they just buy the book and
I could tell the story. I could read the story, or I could just tell the story. What do you?
I don't know. We've set it up in this way, and now they know you won, and the host. So I don't know. It's up to you. But if you'd like to tell the story,
all right. How about not right now? I like the conversation.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Well, maybe we'll come back to that. And if people want, they could ask in the chat if they want to hear a story.
Okay. That sounds great. Yeah. Okay. No, that's fantastic. I cannot believe that. And then you went on to be the host.
Yeah.
And as a result, here we are tonight.
Yeah. And so that was kind of, for me, that was kind of the awakening for me in a lot of ways too, because hosting the show, like I was always, what brought me to that show that night was just the love of hearing stories, like hearing other people tell stories. I sometimes see people that are storytellers that go to shows and they have a story to tell and they do this thing that kind of breaks my heart a little bit, which is that they have written out their story and they have it like printed out on like notebook paper, and they sit in the audience with this kind of face and this body posture, and they're just reading it, and they're like cramming for the test, and they're just like skimming and reading and like cramming it in their head the whole time. And it makes me sad because it's like there are stories happening right here.
Absolutely.
And I have this belief that if you're coming up there to tell a story, even if you have crafted it and written it and you love the way that it is, that if you get on that stage, you are going to remember your story. Like it might be slightly less perfect. It might not come out exactly the way that you wrote it down, but it's going to come out the way that it's going to come out. And I think that that's a craft that people have to develop, which is the idea of writing it, developing it, loving it, and then like crumple it up and just tell it, just speak it. Because what I found, and part of this comes from being an improviser, is that you may actually discover things that come out that are more real and more true than what you ended up writing down, which might sound kind of literary and technical or practical, but the way you tell it is going to be your emotions and all of those things. I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, I totally agree with you. And it's just about being in the moment. And we want to see someone, I think also just in the performance of it, that if you're truly thinking about what you're saying, just something comes out of your mouth that you had never, like a part of the story you had never said, you're going to respond, and you're going to be truly present. And I think that's much more exciting and it's the same with acting than watching someone show us that they're a really good memorizer. Right?
Yeah.
We want to be in the moment and have it be raw and visceral.
Can I ask you a question? And this kind of comes from a scripted theater angle, is you're doing scripted theater, you're rehearsing it, you're practicing your work, working the material. When do you find that things go like, do you have those moments where like you're finding a different connection or something happens that's unexpected on stage and what like any examples come to mind or anything?
Well, all I know is that also takes practice, which is a weird way to say it, but it's almost like through my journey with acting, in order to truly let go, I have had years where, because so why it goes back to that preparation. Like you want to be super prepared, know your lines inside and out, or it's part of your DNA to the point where when you're on stage, you can let it go, right? And so, yes, I'm trying to think. I mean, I wish I had like a juicy story about when everything, derailed and yet it made it better. But I did this play called Plantation where we were getting rewrites of the play day of, and even opening night and I thought to myself, at this point, it's not about getting the words perfect, is kind of what you're saying. It's more about understanding what I'm trying to do,
right.
And being in the moment. And and I am so with you because I'm such a collaborator. That's what makes me happy. And so I'm so happy to be on stage with others that will make it all okay if it doesn't come out perfectly. So it's interesting just in this world of storytelling, when people are on their own, they still have the audience. And I think there's something, I don't know, there's something to that because there's a direct connection to that. And I also just love what you say. If you would speak to a little bit about the process of like being in the audience, you talk about, you give a physical warm-up, which I love, because I think that's so important to be in touch with your body and your voice before you speak for the first time. And you even talk about taking deep inhales and then doing the motorboat. And have you done it with people surrounding you in the audience? And then anyway, just to talk about that too, when you get on stage, so much of it is about breath. And I know, like, just to go back to theater, like, if I just breathe, it's always helpful. But I love your description of the process from the moment where you're sitting in the audience to where you get yourself up on stage and you're looking at all the people. Would you just speak a little bit to that?
Totally. So here's my process. Every performer is different in different ways. People have rituals. I mean, people certainly figure out what works for them.
Yes.
When I'm performing, I have this strong urge to basically connect with the audience, to kind of just feel what the room is feeling in some way, so that I don't want to ever feel, especially if I'm like on the stage or hosting the show or performing in the show, that I'm like a separate person. It's like now, boom, like the crane drops me on the show and now it's the me show. I kind of draw power and strength and energy from the people around me. So like before a show, I like to walk around and just talk to people, just chit chat and kind of like feel it out. Like, was parking really hard? Was the weather really bad? Was it like there was a big protest today that everybody was at? Like what's happening in the world and what's the energy that people are bringing? Because that really can inform a show. I mean, I did a show like many years ago, like there's been so much unrest and injustice in our country, and as we all know, over the past couple of years. And so sometimes you get doing a show the night of a big news story that will come out, like Trayvon Martin or something, then it'll be like, how do you do a fun show without acknowledging that? Like allowing the audience to like have a moment where we recognize, identify these moments, and it kind of can bring us together and bring us from out there to the space that we're creating right here. So that's kind of like a general thing about, especially this is like if there's anybody who wants to host their own show, like I think as a host, part of your job too is to create a safe space for everyone and a warm environment for everyone to feel like they can tell their stories. And then, as a performer, I think you got to kind of be present is the best way I could put it. So like whether that's physically stretching, getting up and not sitting in your seat right before your name might get called, like maybe standing in the back and stretching or something like that, warming up, your mouth or doing vocal warm-ups. And then something I've started doing, we were talking about like memorizing stories, is that I've started doing this thing with like true stories, that I pretty much decide that the two parts that I really want to be right or precise, and just two parts, is the first line and the last line.
Yes.
Like, to me, if I can start the story the way I want to start it and end the story the way I want to end it, I kind of have this sense that like, it's like leaping off the the diving board. It's like, I'm gonna end up in the pool, like, but how I get there might be a little clumsy, or it might be beautiful, but it's like something's going to happen in between. And so like, I say the first line just the way that I wanted to say it by basically practicing it. So the last thing I do before I go on stage is I literally say it out loud in my mouth. I will say the first line of the story, and then I'll say the last line of the story. And then I get to the microphone, the first line of the story. And I say it. And then somewhere in my subconscious, I'm like, we're pretty good. Like, it's all right. Like I give myself like a little, no, I got the first line of the story. And now I'm telling the story. So I'm talking, and it's like, oh, that worked. And that part didn't work as well. And then I sort of get to a point where now you can sort of see the finish line. I'm like, I'm kind of getting there. And so in my brain, I'm kind of like now holding on to the little like nugget of like, that's what the last line is going to be. And I'm telling myself like, don't rush it. Take your time. You're going to get there. And then I say the last line just the way I want to say it. Thank you. And then
splash, or hardly any splash, because it was a perfect dive.
A perfect dive, no splash. So that's been kind of working for me, which is this idea of really trusting myself, but sticking sort of sticking in my brain the first thing I'm going to say and the last thing I'm going to say, so that I know that those two poles, the first and the last, are going to be what I want. And I feel like even if the middle is a little soft and mushy, it will feel, wow, that was really polished. If the last line is super strong, it's like, wow, I really like that last line.
What I love about that too is that you're going on a journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, this is the start of I have my backpack with my first line. I know where I'm starting, and where you're ending. And like you say, it makes it more active, and you can be more, and like you say, you can be more present.
Yeah.
You know where you're going, and you might veer off and have to like get a drink or have a pee break or something.
Yeah.
You're gonna get there.
Yeah. And nothing kills a good story. Like, if you're telling a story to someone in any format, if you're just telling a story to someone and it just has that taper off thing that a lot of stories do, where they kind of they just kind of veer off the story, or it's like, well, and then a bunch of other things happen, but that's not too interesting. Like, it'll actually destroy the story that you've just told. Absolutely. Like, there's like an aspect of just confidence in like letting your story have an ending, and like, boom, like letting it be over. Because if it's a conversational story that you're telling, then it actually has this sort of springboard effect, where it sort of like then opens up a conversation, where then they go, oh my God, I love that. And that reminds me of the time. And then they'll hopefully tell you a story back too. It's not like,
be inspired.
Great story. Okay, great. Well, I gotta go.
Nice talking to you.
Yeah. Which happens too sometimes.
You have a comment. So Ed says, true. Trusting yourself and having the courage to let yourself go on, that the journey with the audience, even if it's a little slappy. Yes, totally. Yes. Okay. It also helps. Okay, if you're charming, charm helps here.
Yeah, it helps to be charming. You don't have to be charming. Yeah.
Just to say though, if we're starting, I like this. We're just talking about opening, and your first line, your last line, which is in your book, you talk about the opening, which is the hook, right? And then the ending, which is sticking the landing. Yeah. For me, I think endings are they're both so challenging. So is there, I don't know, some good advice? So for someone, all you need is a beginning, right? So is there any advice you would give about finding that opening that will inspire you, and then also summing it all up and leaving the audience? I know I am most effective when I just have to process, right? When I'm paralyzed in my seat and I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do. And that's one version of a response, right? There's many that can, after you hear a good story. But what do you say to that, to openings and
Yeah, great. So there is, I'm not the first person to say this, certainly, but there is definitely value in when you are constructing a story or telling a story, that the opening should be, I think a lot of people do this thing where they give a huge sort of on-ramp to their story, like a whole lot of backstory where they feel like you have to know everything about me and what my entire journey was to get to this moment. And the truth is, I don't think any of that's necessary. You know, it's like, think about a TV show or a movie where you just get dropped into the moment. You get dropped into the action. There's something so fun and curiosity inducing to be dropped into a story and to kind of discover, where am I and what's going on? Like, I think that there's always, you know, there's value in sort of having a once upon a time and like setting up the world of the story, but there's something really exciting about entering a story where there's already a question or there's already a curiosity or some kind of a hook that's kind of like you're telling us a little bit of a nugget that's going to pay off later in the story. I also, you know, I don't really believe that there's like a way to tell stories. Like, I think structurally it's good for people to tell stories the way that they tell stories. And I find that like, again, like by just telling your stories before you write your stories down, you can find that, like, how did it come out when I told that story? Did I start, like, for example, I was just telling you about that first show that I went to, and I think I did it wrong. Now I'm thinking back at the story that I just told you.
If only you were able to read your book.
No, I know. But what I did is I started way back. I started in maybe like in college, and I started with performance, and I started with things. I gave you this whole long on-ramp getting you to the moment. Whereas you said, tell me about the first time you were doing that. I could have said, I'm sitting in a dark theater, crammed between two people, all of whom seem to know each other, and they're all buzzing. They're all literate types because I just hear my name called. I have to go on stage. One night earlier, I'm listening to the radio and they say, the Moth is coming to San Francisco. You know, like, I could have told my story like that, where I start in the moment that my heart is pounding. I'm in a theater. I'm about to get called on the stage. Now the audience ideally is curious, like, what's going to happen? Is he going to screw up? Is he going to succeed or fail? Right? Like, what's the value in giving a little bit to the audience? And now when I go back in time about crafting a story and coming up with, you know, finding the secrets and wrestling with all of that. So the way that I told that, I might go back in time, come up with it. Then when I finally find this moment, and now I'm on the stage and I tell the story and I talk about my cousin Norman, and it's not just a reveal about his secrets, but a celebration of his life and the amazing life that he led as a school teacher, as an opera buff, as a Shakespeare enthusiast, as an asshole monologuist in my show, The Asshole Monologue, like all of the things that my 81-year-old cousin Norman did. And I got to really celebrate him. And then the end of that might be that I won the show and now I'm the host of the Moth. Like, I could frame that whole story.
Well, the first one was your vomit draft, Corey.
I vomited it out. Yes. Exactly. Exactly.
No, yeah. I hear you. And I know you talk about different ways to tell a story. And I love that you're just giving permission that there's no one way. And I think that's great. It's could be linear. You talk about the hero's journey and the pedal, all of it, but it's finding what works for you. Totally. I remember there's a story you tell in the book about, you know, I'm a sleepwalker too.
Are you?
Do you still sleepwalk?
Oh, yes. Well, yes, I will say I still sleepwalk, although I'm married now. So anytime I get up, like, my wife was a very light sleeper, Jenny will be like, where are you going? So, like, if I was about to sleepwalk, like, there hasn't been a sleepwalking since the time I walked out of the house next door and peed in my neighbor's bathroom. That was the last known sleepwalking in my house, which was,
It sounds eventful, though.
It was eventful. I have a lot of exciting sleepwalks.
Well, that's like good story fodder. But I bring it up because, like, I think you introduced that story with, like, I was naked at the front desk. You know, like, where we're like, wait a second. And then you drop little nuggets of what's happened along the way. And anyway, I just bring it up because it is true that that's a hook. I do think that man, stuff that happens in the sleep is is quite
it's
interesting.
True. I mean, it's true too, because in our controlled lives, like if you are a sleepwalker, there's this thing of like it is being out of control, and like you may find yourself in situations that you don't anticipate finding yourself in, and then sort of back to like the overall concept of like ways to tell stories. Like I really don't think that there is a single way that makes a story good. I think that part of what helps storytellers develop their craft is telling okay versions, like being okay, mediocre. Being mediocre, like it's okay. There's this thing that a lot of times, and it's the same thing in improv. It's like my friend Ed Herbstman in New York, like he has a theater called the Magnet Theater. Ed.
Yes,
and
of course I know Ed.
Yeah. This may even be the Ed who commented, and we don't know. It could be, but like the idea of like getting on a stage and it could be.
It's all about you, Ed.
And you can get on stage and have absolutely nothing, and sometimes you have to get on that stage because the stage needs someone to go out on that stage, and. There's this idea of just using whatever is in front of you and taking like the first offer, and that becomes the thing that when there's a game that I like to play. It's sort of an ideation game that's called That Reminds Me of the Time. Do you want to play it for a minute?
Yes, let's totally play.
Can we play a game? So this is like a game if you're stuck and you like don't have there was a typo. Don't stop talking about me. So this is like if you just are like, I don't know what stories to tell, I don't have any stories, you could start with anything. So maybe we'll ask Ed or someone in the audience to put an object, like a household object, in the chat. Any object. So just type something in the chat of your here we go. You got hi Diane. We have dishwasher. Okay. So does dishwasher does that remind you of go?
Yes, that reminds me of the time when we were in a pandemic.
Yeah.
And I spent so much damn time loading the dishwasher and then unloading the dishwasher.
Yeah.
Like twice a day, it felt like.
Nice. Yes. Okay. Well, that reminds me, loading and unloading the dishwasher reminds me of routines that have cropped up in my pandemic and kind of quarantine life, including the dishes, but also like setting the coffee the night before has become like this kind of like ritual for me of just like, I know that tomorrow is going to start at least with the coffee ready. So if nothing else, I've got that.
That reminds me of routines, reminds me of the time that my sister was doing a dance routine that she had choreographed for our relatives.
Yes.
And during one of the high kicks, she let out a fart, and I think she never recovered. I think she still hasn't recovered.
I love that. Okay, I'm not going to go as far. I'm going to go with dance routines.
Okay.
Reminds me of the dance center in Penfield, New York, near where I grew up. And I was a dancer, man. I had the jazz pants and the tap shoes and the jazz shoes, and I remember being the only boy in the dance center and loving it, and like loving learning how to dance, and I felt just so excited, and like I loved being there, and I liked the attire. I felt like I was in the Beat It music video.
Sure.
That was kind of the thing. I kind of fancied myself a Michael Jackson backup dancer.
Oh, well, Michael Jackson reminds me of the time when I was a little girl and I had a major crush. Now it's more complicated.
Yeah.
But I also remember watching the Motown 25th anniversary and seeing him moonwalk for the first time.
Yes. Okay.
Blew my mind. Sorry.
Okay. No, I got a moonwalk story. So moonwalking takes me to. I actually met a backup dancer once from the Beat It video, and he taught me how to moonwalk. I was 11 years old, and he taught me like he actually did it. It was a dance. I learned. I was wearing parachute pants, just if you need.
I kind of feel like we have to see you moonwalk now, although we're playing a game.
Yeah, we're playing a game. So let's just pause the game for a second, because I want to reflect a little on what we just did. So effectively, by just riffing in like these kind of one-line moments from our lives, either our lives now, loading the dishwasher in the pandemic, or setting the coffee pot, or sister farting in the show, or taking dance lessons, or learning to moonwalk. These are memories I haven't thought about in a long time. I haven't thought about learning to moonwalk. And so now I actually have this sort of like, is there a story there? Like, this is sort of the seeds that could basically be planted to rediscover moments from our lives that we maybe haven't thought about. And those are the things that we could be like, oh my God, I have a thing that I could write about today, or I could think about that. It's just like getting out of the now, but also connecting it to something that happened a long time ago, just by like playing 2 minutes of like bouncing stories off of another person. Yeah.
No, I love it. And I love, you probably could play that game on your own. In fact, what's so great about I was mentioning the artist way, if anybody knows that, that's like a journey that you can go on as an artist, and it makes you do things.
Yeah.
I've never done it, but I know people who have. But in your book, you have pages like this.
Yeah.
You can like write, and you have that reminds me of the time section where you can just see where it takes you.
Absolutely. It's a great meditation, and it's a great sort of like mental exercise, because, I think in general, there's always, there's the two parts of developing creative ideas. One is the ideation, like coming up with, what am I going to talk about, what I'm going to write about. And many people get kind of stymied by that process. And then there's the shaping it and the crafting it into like a thing of like making that into a story. And so that was something that I kind of wanted to explore. So this game is more centered around that first one of like, if you're feeling stuck, there's some ways that you can essentially, you don't have to be an improviser or get on a stage, although I highly recommend it if you haven't done it in a while. But the concept is like entering that mindset, the mindset of like being okay, opening up your, your head to what could be and what stories you might have, and shutting down the critic, and not
there's
stopping.
No right or wrong.
Don't judge, and just generate ideas, tell stories. And so one way that I like to do this, especially in pre/post-pandemic ways, is when I find myself like I'm working on a story or I'm developing a story, I kind of sometimes, I can get like in my head about it, and like, is it good? Is it not good? And so I like to tell it to people. And, I talked about talking to my brother or friends of mine or my wife, but there's only so many times that they want to hear a story, or that they'll, kind of be fresh. So one of my little hacks is like, I'll go in like an Uber, or even better, like an Uber pool or a Lyft line, like when there's like more than one person in there.
Totally.
So you have a captive audience, and you say, you have to have sort of the nerve to be like, does anybody want to hear a story? Or can I tell you guys a story? Because you're talking to a room full of strangers, right?
Totally.
But I've never had them say, no, do not tell me.
Because who doesn't want to hear a story?
Right? Yeah. And then it's like, okay. And then you just start to tell your story. And then you see how it comes out to a room full of strangers. A car full of strangers. Yeah.
And you're looking, so that's feedback. You're looking for verbal response, or anything that like where people aren't paying attention, they start looking at their phones, or
kind of. That is a kind of feedback. It's also, I don't know, I just feel like it's just,
or it's just practice.
Just practice. Don't expect of like, oh, I have this idea. I know, I'm just going to get on stage and I'm just going to tell it for the first time and it's going to be perfect. It's like, it does take telling the story, and it does take finding your way through the story to find like, oh, what's that last line, or what's that opening line, or what's that moment that that's the juice of it that I'm gonna
totally the story making.
Yeah.
No, I guess that's so fantastic that you do it, and I'm just wondering, like, in the moment, did they give you thoughts about it, or did they just say thank you and go on their merry way? I'm just curious.
Yeah, usually I've done this a lot. So usually it actually leads to conversation, is what it usually does. It's not usually like, well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think the second act was a little bit slow, and there was a joke that I think could have worked better if you rephrased. I'm not usually getting feedback. I'm usually getting like either two kinds of feedback. feedback. One, questions. If they have follow-up questions, like what happened to that? And what about this? That I take as feedback of like, ooh, I need to clarify that in the storytelling. So questions are awesome because they are actually like, that's information that you're like, oh, I didn't give enough info, or I need to pay that off or explain that thing.
Yes.
Or the other feedback is that they go like, oh, that's, it's so funny you say that. That reminds me of something else. And I think when that happens, it's like you've told a pretty good story because they didn't have a lot of questions, and it's inspired them. To talk and to kind of,
because that's what we want. We want to connect as human beings, and that's such a great way to connect. Oh my gosh, should we look here, Corey?
We have questions.
I see in the Ask the Question bank there are 2 questions.
Thank you, question askers. And we want to remind people you can all ask questions now. We have some time left.
The first one is from Laura, and she says, have you ever been at a loss for words?
Well, I see that my wife is in the chat, so she could probably answer that. Not me. I am rarely at a loss for words. In fact, my wife is also an improviser and a performer, and she sometimes rues the day that that she married a storyteller, because she has said this thing to me. She's like, everything doesn't have to be a story, and it's true. So it's just like a thing happened, and now like, oh, I have to tell you everything, and then I like set the whole thing up, and she's like, just tell me what happened, like just get to it. So that's a lesson. So sometimes I've been the opposite. I've been not at a loss for words.
So the answer is probably no.
Not me. I'm a little verbose.
And then Louisa would like to know, did you write this book in the pandemic?
Great question. I rewrote the book in the pandemic. I started this book before the pandemic, and through the pandemic has been the process for me of revising, editing, updating, improving, really improving, working on edits to the book, and then ultimately getting it out. It's also funny, the process for me. It's my first time writing a book, and so since I finished it pre-pandemic, like I finished it probably in February of this year, like just before was really when the book felt like, not the book, the manuscript, like it wasn't a book yet. It was like a manuscript.
True. It starts off as a manuscript. Yeah, that's true.
And it was interesting because like going through a lot of things that I've gone through in my life, with my family, with with health, with Black Lives Matter, with sort of understandings of privileges that I've had in my life that have been real, like, you've
had an opinion in that way.
I've had a lot, And so looking at stories that I had written from the lens of like, this isn't just me telling stories anymore. This is a book that I'm putting out into the world, and looking at my own stories with now like a different lens of like, maybe I want to not tell that story or tell the story in a different way. Or also I think that I believe that stories evolve over time. That sometimes a story that feels like a great story, that when you're 25 and you tell this hilarious thing that happened, when you're 45, you're not going to tell it the same way. Like you have a little different like life experience and insight of like, who was I that did that thing?
Totally.
But it doesn't mean you can't tell that story. I think that it's like fun to watch how a story can change over time and evolve.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Hindsight is 20/20.
Yeah.
And you can find insights that will only enhance the story, I would think. Right?
Yeah.
I'm just knowing that you went through this process with the book, and you go through a process with storytelling, and knowing that we have to receive feedback, like in order to improve. And I'm sure you sent the book out to people and they gave you feedback, and you have these great ways of giving and receiving feedback in the book that I love. Because at Looking Glass, we're a theater full of artists who all have a voice, and I love it. It's my artistic home where I'm surrounded by really smart people. But, there's a certain way to go about it sometimes, so you don't stomp on an idea. And, or sometimes I think people prescribe, like, do this, do that. And I just love what you say. And I guess what I want to start off with, if you want to talk about feedback and some of the things that you talk about in your book, but also, are you are you just the person who I think you would be, that you just take all the feedback and it's all good? Or do you ever find, like you say in that Aikido reference, do you get defensive and is it ever challenging for you?
Great question. Because feedback is an F word, right? People don't want feedback on anything. Like you say, like, oh, I'm looking for some feedback, or it's like, I'm going to give you some feedback, and like, it's like feedback is not something people generally welcome, because usually it's critique and criticism and telling you all the things that are wrong. So me personally, I write about it. It's in the book, and it's something that I really, it's like my practice and something that I am really working on, and try to, follow my own advice, which is basically draws from two aspects of an improviser's mindset. The first is how I like to give feedback, and how I recommend other people give feedback, and also how to receive feedback. So in giving feedback, if we think about it in terms of yes and, which is often in the improv parlance, the canon of improviser, it's like we think of it as a creative thing of like accepting what's there, adding to it, and in that same way, thank you, Krishna. Thank you. That if you are giving feedback rather than problem spotting and saying, I don't like this, I don't understand that, I don't like that, starting from the place of what does work. Like, what do I like about the story, the project, the idea, and look for the bright spots, look what is good, and then enhance that. What could you add to that? How could you enhance and build on that? So if you start your framing of your critique for whatever it is, for somebody else's story, project, or whatever creative work, if you start with what's good, and then we kind of build on that, we yes and the parts that are good, then I believe that the parts that aren't as good take care of themselves. Maybe they will get stronger because you're improving the good parts. Or maybe like I use the metaphor of like a plant that's got like a dying side and a living side. If we water the living side, the dying side will eventually take care of itself, and then the plant will thrive in the other dimension. And from a creative standpoint, if somebody is telling me what they like about it, how to add on to it. So I'm not just sugarcoating and, Pollyanna, like everything's great, I love it all. I'm saying, find what is good. Like, what is working in that story?
Yeah.
What am I curious about? What do I want to hear more about? What wasn't clear? And then I might find that the story is actually about this. Because that's truly what I believe about all stories, that it might be a story about a car accident, or it might be a story about, finding a will, but really it's a story about something else. There's something else. And once you kind of find what is the story really about, then you've really found your direction. So the other side of that is receiving feedback, which can be very challenging because people tend to either like block it out, like, like not want to hear it. Like people are giving them feedback, but they're just protecting themselves by, by putting a wall up, blocking it out and not letting it in. And then they're protected. Then I survived the onslaught of feedback. Is it done? Great. And then they're like, okay, so what should I do? How should I fix my story? Because they've blocked it. They were so afraid of getting feedback. And then the other thing that people do is they fight it. They like, you give me feedback and like, oh, I already tried that. They like combat the feedback where like they're ready for it. And like, you give me an idea, I will tell you why your idea won't work. And then they're like, okay, any other ideas? And after a while, they're like, wow, nobody has any more ideas. Guess why? We don't want to be yelled at. We don't want you to tell us that we have bad ideas.
No, so, that one in particular, because, we have note sessions after a play, and I found myself sometimes saying, oh, but this is what actually was really going on, and defending myself. And then I was like, shut it. Just take the damn note. Don't try to.
And that's it. That's like I use like an example of Aikido in the book is in Aikido, it's basically like using that, like effectively yes-anding the feedback, like listening to the feedback, even if it's just like letting them talk, write it down. Oh, okay, thank you. Just like letting them say it, no matter what it is, even if it's negative, just like, thank you for that. If you record it, if you write it down, if you don't fight it or you don't block it out, then, then later, maybe you look back and when you're not emotional, you could take that note, or maybe you could yes and them and say, oh, if I do that, then I could go into this. Like, because all you're doing at that point is you're just getting insight, you're getting feedback, and you're just riffing back on what might be and what you could do. You don't have to change anything, because ultimately I believe this, that you are the artist, you are the actor, you are the author, you are the creator, and you are getting a gift of anybody giving you any kind of feedback.
I agree.
And you get to choose what you use or what you don't use. So you might as well open yourself up to at least hear it, even if it's not framed in the best way. But
yes,
like
absolutely.
Take it in, thank them for their feedback, think about it, maybe try it. I mean, and then if you go, that didn't work, I tried it. Then you can be like, yeah.
And we'll be taking feedback about our session tonight. You can
please
let us know, please how we did. I'm getting the cue that we are
okay.
Oh my gosh, Corey, we're at the end. How did this happen? It's so fun to talk to
Diane
you.
Murray.
I have to end
all-star audience
by making it about your book, because here's the thing, and I'm not lying about this. I read this and I referred to it again and again, and I've applied it to my life. And that's a sign of a really great book. So please, the link is still there. It's not too late. You can get your 10% off. And thank you again to Barbara for having us here. Is there anything else you want to say? Do you have a closing line? Are you going to
want to encourage
stick the landing,
baby? I wanted to encourage everybody to support the Looking Glass Theater, to follow you on, because you're not on social media, but your theater is, and to get back into theaters, to tell stories, to share them with the world. I just think that a world with more stories is a world that I want to live in. And my hope through this is just to get more people to tell more stories. So if it encourages you or inspires any story that you can call somebody up you haven't talked to in a while that you were reminded of, then do that. And then that would have been a job well done, a story well told.
That's exactly right. You stuck it, my friend. You stuck that landing.
Yes.
Mwah. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Corey.
Thank
you. It was an absolute pleasure.
All right. Thank you.